So, welcome to the Less Consulting Puff podcast, episode number 18. I'm joined today with a regular guest, Jeet Poptani. First podcast after the summer, and it's been an interesting summer. So, this podcast is about AMS, InfoSec, and how those two elements are quite often the forgotten part of any SAP implementation. Okay, so that's all like the context. And it's all like in two halves. I think the first part was I wanted to have a general conversation with you, G, just in terms of we're both always in the trenches doing SAP delivery. And one of those areas which is always problematic is service delivery. So I want to talk about that. So that's one half of this conversation. And then the second half of the conversation is something which is sort of like starting to pop. We did a podcast a few months ago about thinking ERP, and we started to talk about sovereign cloud, and we still spoke about sovereign AI, and we've both done a lot of thinking about that, and we both blog quite a lot about that stuff. So the second conversation piece, wrapping up around AMS and InfoSec, is what's really going on in the world at the moment and how that's going to pan out back into the SAP ecosystem, which I think is fascinating. So we're going to split it a little bit. So the first part of the conversation is let's just talk about AMS, InfoSec from a service delivery perspective. And for me, I include service design and InfoSec as key elements of my phase zero. They're always part of my design piece. For me, there seems to be a constant lesson learned that IT organizations often feel that they're not part of the operating model, that they shouldn't be part of the future, Tom. That because they run ITIL and they've got some legacy standard operating procedures, that's enough. And I think there's a lesson learned around when we do our target operating model design for our phase zero, that we have to think about what does that service design look like. And quite often, I feel that the service design doesn't always mirror the InfoSec requirements. So you quite often have a chief information security officer who doesn't always align with the service part of the organization. So we quite often find that we're delivering a complex SAP program into an organization where the service provision is quite often driven by procurement, whilst the InfoSec piece is very much driven by the need to be hardened and secure. And I think that's interesting. So there's some lessons learned just in terms of making sure that the InfoSec and service design are part of it. I think there's a theme which I've seen play out, which is sort of like modern service design very much came out of SAP. ITIL came out of SAP. So, SAP is 50 years old. Really, ITIL started to come into its fore when we started to go with Industry 3.0. We saw like R2, then R3. And then we got to Industry 3.0 and we got the connected global economy. And so we got ITIL became the way in which IT service is delivered and it's governed and structured and designed. And then SAP and ServiceNow came along with some products. So you've got ServiceNow and we've got SAP Soulman and now Cloud AMS. So we've got some really good tooling, linking into service desks and help desks and all that good stuff, and now linking into the hyperscalers. So we now have a very mature, complex, federated service architecture supporting our really complex, cloud-centric, AI-agnostic, AI-agentic enterprise architecture. So it's getting really, really complex now. But constantly, when it comes to support and comes to sort of like InfoSec and AMS, it's always about value v SLAs. And you always see the sort of like, for me, this race to get the cheapest price. It's almost, you've spent all this money transforming your organization. but then you'll want your support piece to be as cheap as possible.
Yeah, I mean, just to add and extend that, I think one of the key thing that in the modern digital transformation, and we talk about the ERP transformation, is the key, the term as well, like future target operating model as well, and this needs to be one of the key consideration as well as part of the discovery phase activities that we do, because if we look around, I think most of the organization, they have done the systems are quite old, and same as their the organization as well who is supporting that. So from the perspective of the modernization of system plus the organizations, both of these needs to go in hand, and that's where the AMS as well comes in the picture, because we need to look into the future and see what is going to look like. And as part of the discovery, and most of it, what I'm seeing that is provided by various different vendors and suppliers, they focus on the technology stack migration, but that then there needs to be an internal discussions within the organizations which are also focusing on the aspect of the how to modernize their IT organizations, which is going to support the delivery, and also the after once the systems are being migrated as well. So that's quite key, and it has to be part of that discovery system well in the at the start of the journey, rather than thinking a little bit late. I think that's one of the key considerations as part of the discovery as well.
I think that's right. I mean, when I look at this and look at my notes, we often see that the big enterprise cloud vendors always say to customers, move to the cloud and your TCO will go down. Yes. But the reality is that when you move to a hyperscaler and you move to SAP, you're now moving into a very, very rigid service AMS architecture, where everything is identified, everything has got SLAs behind it. And what I always see is the TCO of moving. TCO goes up when you move to the cloud, doesn't go down. And I also think there's the bit about, you're right, about you have to do your target operating model design around future IT at the beginning. And you also have to do that organizational change management impact assessment about what does that mean? Absolutely. Because a lot of organizations, especially in Europe, have gone BPO. So they've outsourced totally IT. So IT's gone, and they've also outsourced the service part of it, and they're left with a very, very small nucleus of leaders who manage all the functions for IT. But it means they have no capability, no capacity going forward. And I think that's interesting, because I think when we deliver in SAP, we often discover a hybrid architecture with elements of onshore, nearshore, and offshore. And then that goes up and down depending upon the appetite for spend. And if it's a race to the bottom, then you'll see more and more offshore support and less nearshore and onshore. And I think the other thing people forget is that when we talk about AMS and our service design is the functional piece, about establishing the COE, and about you need to, when we implement SAP, we're implementing a target operating model. The tech is part of it, but SAP is our operating model, and therefore you have to support the business. You have to have a functional COE. That's often omitted. A lot of organizations still fall back onto super user communities, don't they, to provide support?
I mean, it's a twofold issues that we see. First is the late introduction of the future target operating model. That's the one key one. But then I think we have also seen that in some of the implementations for the SAP as well. Once the system has gone live, there needs to be a stabilization phase, because not everything can be migrated, not everything can be deployed on day zero. So from that perspective, I think we need to start considering this as a phased approach in terms of the delivery, rather than considering that once the system is live, they can immediately start to use that. So there needs to be an aftercare, which I call that once your the first pass of the system, the new S4 is live, and then you need to have a capabilities to manage that stabilization phase, making sure that the business is engaged, involved around it. And then we have this the target operating model that we have actually discussed and debated for a long is actually is brought to life when we actually have the first go live. So those are the things that needs to be factored in, and not having that very tunnel view of the technical delivery, but focusing more on the how do we make sure that there is a right set of adoption from the business, and also having that target operating model bringing to life, and then planning in such a way that that the AMS is efficient in terms of managing any future changes or issues that come along.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think bringing it back to sort of like the phase zero piece, I think there's the need for having the strawman service design completed. I think we develop a load of strategy documents during phase zero, integration data migration, data collection, all that sort of thing. But I think you have to have your future IT state strategy document, so you can be very, very clear about what IT is going to look like, because you get this perverse focus on firewalls or servers, and don't care about any of that type of stuff, to be honest. I really just care about what does the framework look like to support SAP and the sort of like extended architecture around SAP going forward. I think the other thing is by phase zero, we talk about the service design product and what will go into the service design. I think we have to talk about the SOPs and the support documentation. But I also think we have to think we have to think about a business continuity plan in terms of what does BC look like? And the business continuity plan is different from the DR plan. They're totally separate things. So that then links your service back into your operational business about what happens if you don't have availability. I mean, you know, Marks and Spencer's have only just started online shopping again after sort of like 6 months. Even now there are supply chain issues in M&S, you know, so it has a major operational impact. So I think there's a bit about linking your service design back to your business continuity plan, which is driven by the business. I think that then sort of like is a segue into the second part of the conversation. Okay. And so you mentioned to me earlier about globalization is dead. Okay. We are going through a constant perma crisis in terms of things impacting the organizations, but globalization's dead. We see a big focus now on sovereign cloud, sovereign AI. And it got me thinking. And so in the UK recently, we've had 4 well-documented retail cyber attacks, and that's Harrods, JLR, M&S, and the Co-op. Okay. And these hackers have all gone after the finance data, and they've taken data. They all look to be sort of like peer-to-peer rogue states. So they seem to be sovereign sponsored, opposed to being sort of like organised crime, which is interesting. And it made me start to think about joining the dots about what's next with AMS, because logically, if you've got sovereign cloud and you've got sovereign AI and everything's sovereign, and you've also got lots of local statutory requirements now in terms of sovereign, it made me think about sovereign AMS. Surely the weakest link now to your InfoSec model is the fragmented nature of your support model. Yeah, you know, you're still driven by people and people doing stuff and people supporting systems, and fragility is based upon levels of vulnerability because the AMS model is overextended now. That service design has got too many handshakes. There are too many people involved. There's too many vulnerabilities, and it got me thinking about what's next. So in the SAP AMS market is dominated by Southeast Asian organisations providing AMS offshore, and then a nearshore model as well. So in Europe, we have a lot of nearshore from Eastern Europe. You've got to be thinking, a lot of geopolitics going on. We've seen the rise of the BRICS, so that was well presented last week. And then we've had the trade wars going on with the tariffs. And we saw the spectacle of a trade war between the US and India. We saw the Indian PM go off and meet with China and Russia last week. And then at the weekend, we saw the US president start to talk about US federal offshore AMS coming back from India. And that's interesting. That's sort of like, that's an evolving picture in terms of, are we going to move to sovereign AMS? And then what do you think about that, Jeet? That whole construct?
I mean, definitely. I think we need to start. Start looking at the sovereign infrastructure. I think that is really important so that we can manage the data in the country specific. So that is really important, considering what's happening around the globe as well. So that is quite key. But again, when it comes to the sovereign AMS, I think definitely in terms of managing the systems, protecting them, and making sure our IT organizations are secure. That needs to be, at least the first level support needs to happen in here, because there is always a question in the organization in terms of the cost. Still, there is a value to move some of it outside, but then there needs to be some level of support, or some level of assurance that is required in the in-house, in country specific as well. So we need to identify some of those critical components, especially around the safety and the security of the data that we hold. How do we manage at least that in the country, and have that sovereign structure in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again in the future?
I mean, I did some analysis. So I used to do security accreditation. So I did some analysis work earlier this week, looking at the Harrods, JLR, M&S and Co-op, and looking at vulnerabilities around their architectures. So my view is that SAP is very, very secure. It's hard and secure. I think there's a case around sovereign software. That might be an interesting conversation coming up soon in terms of where your software is built and who supports it from a software level perspective, because SAP have invested a lot in India in terms of software development. But if you want sovereign software without backdoors, where do you develop your software? That's interesting. I think that there's a conversation piece around that, which then says, do you need to develop almost like a sovereign view of your enterprise architecture?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the SAP, I mean, I understand. I think you can track all the codes and everything, but I just want to take one notch up in terms of AI and the LLMs that we are using. So if we start using these LLMs, you really don't know what exactly are they, where exactly are they fetching their data from. I think they can be quite.
That's exactly right. I think that's exactly right, because that's the next piece, which is about you've got the piece which says you need to control who accesses your architecture, because if you did a sovereign view of your enterprise architecture, you'd understand that SAP per se is harder to secure. So the vulnerability doesn't really lay in your application layer. Yes. And I did the analysis of where the vulnerability is laid in sort of like the enterprise architecture. For those four organizations, and that vulnerability list was quite significant. None of it really was to do with SAP at all, but there were vulnerabilities everywhere else. So if you then start to add in another layer, which is in the AMS space now, you're starting to see AI AMS runbooks, and you're starting to see more and more AI involved in standard sort of like application support and maintenance.
Yes.
Again, you would want to know from where that AMS is pointing from. You'll want to know where that AMS was developed from, who's controlling that AMS. Suddenly sovereignty is going to trigger a lot of questions about who does what from where and who has access to what from where. And I almost think, just from this conversation, I've written it down, you're going to have to develop a sovereign optic to the enterprise design to show that to sort of like your CISO, in terms of the reality is all organizations are digital now. We're past that. We're moving into Industry 4.0 with AI and robotics, and probably AI with agency by 2030. This is a really serious space. At the same time, we've got BRICS developing, we've got perma-crisis, we've got God knows what's going on constantly in the world. You're almost at that point whereby people are going to have to want to lock down again. So are we almost seeing a point whereby we're going to go back to on-prem? Will sovereign, the need for sovereign drive us back?
I think that's really a good point, because we have this cloud for like good 10 years. I think the adoption rate has picked up as well. I mean, we need some more data. I think one of the key driver around this was the scalability, and also in terms of the costing as well, like the adoption of the cloud. But with all these new events that we are seeing around the world, from considering all that, I think in the long run we would have more data around the cloud, and then there will be a decision that whether we need to keep some of the data that we have on-prem, or we need to ship it to the cloud. And again, on the cloud as well, I think the way the cloud technology is moving and it's growing, there are a lot of options that are available within the cloud as well. So considering where the actual value within the organization is, we can ring fence it and identify those areas and keep it on-prem, which are much more secure compared to keeping everything on the cloud side of things. So
I think that's right.
Point, it will eventually, I think people will at least start to think about it, that if they want to utilize the on-prem capabilities as well.
I'll leave you with two thoughts then, as we sort of like wrap up. One, I read a piece earlier this week about S4 cloud on-prem.
Yes.
So we're talking about PCE being delivered into essentially a cloud architecture, but in the client's DC.
Yeah.
Now that used to be, we've had that for a while now through HP anyway. So HP have offered that for a while. It's called a concierge service.
Yes.
Where they basically HP build out in your own DC cloud architecture for what was then RISE, which is now PC private. But that looks like that's going to be extended across all the hyperscalers offering that. So that then basically means we're back on-prem with SAP. And I think the next piece was just in terms of black box AI, in terms of where organizations really want to have tight control of AI. It's going to go on-prem. It's going to go back into their own DC. So you're almost going to see this back to micro DCs. So maybe we will end up with micro DCs, with that, what needs to be on-prem in terms of what you need for sovereignty, for your ERP or through AI. Do you know what I mean? It's an interesting evolving time again, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good to talk. And I'll see you in a week's time when we'll do another podcast.
Brilliant. Sounds good. Thanks.